I am going to read Unit 5.15 for you. And then if there's any complicated content, I will explain those as well. So I'm going to click on, not the introduction, but the one under it usually is the one with all of the content for you. All right, I'm going to go full screen. So this unit is on abstract expressionist art. The post-war art scene, the 1940s brought about a shift in the focal point of the art world from Europe to America. Paris was spared the devastation visited on many cities during World War II, but lost much of its vitality during the Nazi occupation. In addition, many of Europe's leading painters, sculptors, architects, dealers, and critics had fled the continent, seeking safety and artistic freedom in the United States. Post-war New York became a vibrant gathering place for the avant-garde, and an invitation to exhibit at the city's Museum of Modern Art came to be considered the pinnacle of an artist's career, so that would be like the height of their career. Many American painters steeped in the social realist movement, so that means they immersed themselves in it while working for the Federal Art Project in the 1930s, turned to wildly different styles. After World War II, a native-born American and a European immigrant became the leading proponents of groundbreaking new movement called Abstract Expressionism. As European artists flocked to the United States to escape the war, they brought with them the energy of such modern avant-garde movements as Surrealism, German Expressionism, Fauvism, and Synthetic Cubism. American artists, seeking to move beyond the confines of realism, embraced these ideas and infused their own paintings with a new sense of abstraction and vitality that the critics soon labeled abstract expressionism. So those American artists were they didn't like the constraints of realism and they wanted more artistic freedom. So that's why they broke away. The movement itself did not contain a common style, but rather a collective attitude. For abstract expressionists, the act of painting became more important than the end result. The artists worked vigorously and often spontaneously to express personal thoughts and ideas in their paintings. They wanted to elicit an emotional response from the viewer. So here are a few that we can see. So this one is from Kandinsky. And keep in mind that a lot of these artists, it was more about the process than the end result. This is one Miro. All of these are abstract expressionist pieces. And there's Brock. And then lastly, in this set, we have Willem de Kooning. So you can see that all of these have definitely taken a break from realism. Jackson Pollock was born in 1912 on a farm in Cody, Wyoming. As a child, he and his family traveled throughout the western United States. Pollock attended the Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles. At age 18, he moved to New York and enrolled at the Arts Students League. Throughout the 1930s, he painted in the realist style that he had learned from his mentor and friend, Thomas Hart Benton. At an experimental workshop in 1936, Pollock learned new and unconventional techniques from Mexican muralist David Alfaro Zungueros, techniques that Pollock would use in his later works. From 1938 to 1942, Pollock worked for the WPA's Federal Art Project. By the 1940s, Pollock had found the artistic voice for which he is known today. Non-representational, so that means you don't see any kind of distinct image in it. The paintings are filled with interlacing lines and drips and splashes of color. So his were action paintings. Art critic Harold Rosenberg coined the term action painting in 1952. He noticed a shift in American art in which artists began to emphasize the physical act of painting over the completed work. In 1947, Jackson Pollock created his first drip painting by placing a swath of canvas on the floor. With broad gestures, so that means his arms are just flying, they're open wide, and that he's using all of his range of motion and the motion of his whole body. He used brushes and sticks to drip, pour, and flick paint onto the canvas. This was a radical break from the traditional canvas painting, in which artists typically stretched the material across a wood frame and treated the surface with gesso, which is a white, it's kind of a preparatory solution, and placed it upright on an easel. Working on the floor liberated Pollock and enabled him to approach a composition from all sides. So that means he could move freely around the canvas on the floor. He responded to the image as it developed, often improvising as he worked. Pollock drew inspiration for his innovative style from music and the European avant-garde. A dedicated jazz enthusiast, Pollock spent hours listening to Dixieland and the spontaneous improvisations of jazz greats such as Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. So they're spontaneous improvisations. That means sometimes they would just riff, like it wasn't written in the music, but they would go ahead but they were just making it up as they went along. He also admired the way that the Surrealists incorporated subconscious themes into their work. In Autumn Rhythm, the image that we see here on the right, Pollock's massive canvas stretches more than 17 feet long and nearly 9 feet high. He developed the image by moving in and around it, applying layer upon layer of thinned paint with sticks, knives, and trowels. So a trowel is a kind of, you may use those in the garden or doing some construction. Pollock had a keen ability to fuse the impulsive with the planned. I can control the flow of paint, he asserted. There is no accidents. Autumn Rhythm is the name of the painting, exhibits the delicate balance between spontaneous gestures and the calculated application of paint. So in Autumn Rhythm, which we see here, we'll navigate through the sides to see a closer view, but they experimented with synthetic household paint, pastels, watercolors, oil, acrylics. So they used a wide palette with all of the available tools. So that's a little bit closer. We're kind of moving around looking at the painting more close up. Pollock liked the physical properties of these different synthetic paints, which had a fluid, runny quality that enabled him to create delicate interlacing lines, bold splatters, and expressive drips. Autumn Rhythm is purely non-representational. Pollock did not create shapes that are extracted from reality, nor does the painting represent anything from the real world. However, the image does employ effectively the elements of art and the principles of design. So repetition is one of those patterns. Pollock began by applying diluted black paint to an untreated canvas, which absorbed his initial layer of pigment and created a faded effect. Next, he layered undiluted white, brown, and turquoise to create a web of overlapping interlaced lines. These lines didn't absorb into the canvas, but remained slightly raised from its surface. In some places, he dribbled paint pooled on the canvas. As the pooled paint dried, its surface wrinkled, creating interesting textures. In a radical break from tradition, Pollock's painting contains no distant focal point. The all-over composition pushes the viewer's eye to move around the work. There's no beginning and no end. His painting is a study in contrast, thick and thin, straight and curved, light and dark. Our next artist is Willem de Kooning. He was born in Holland in 1904. He studied for 8 years at the Rotterdam Academy of Fine Arts and later worked for a local department store. In 1926, he boarded a British freighter and headed for America. So he got on a ship and headed this way. After a somewhat circuitous route and various odd jobs, de Kooning arrived in New York in 1927. With support from the WPA's Federal Art Project in the mid-1930s, de Kooning was able to devote his full attention to painting. In 1938, he met his future wife, Elaine, who would later become a significant artist in her own right. De Kooning created both abstract and non-representational works throughout his career and developed a unique style that became a hallmark of the Abstract Expressionist movement. He used aggressive brushwork and bold colors to create emotional, provocative imagery. So his work is abstract and non-representational. So again, that non-representational means that you don't see a recognizable form or a focal point. Abstract, you would see a recognizable image, but it's going to have different characteristics than you would find naturally. By the 1950s, William de Kooning emerged as one of the leaders of the Abstract Expressionist movement. Like Jackson Pollock, he poured energy and personal expression into the process of painting. Fueled by critics, so that means that when people criticized them, that they just wanted to work harder to prove their art form. An aura of competition developed between the two artists, and both vied for leadership of the Abstract Expressionist movement. So that means they both wanted to be the leader of that movement. All right, so Woman One is the name of this piece we see on the right. De Kooning made a series of 6 woman paintings in the 1950s that solidified his position of prominence within the abstract expressionist movement. In Woman One, de Kooning depicted a seated female, legs crossed and arms resting on her lap. So that's what he painted. Slashes of black paint define her wild eyes, tooth-bearing grin. She is a garish figure whose oversized proportions are defined by brash colors and frenzied marks. So that means those marks were put down quickly and in a hurry, and you see that energy in the painting. The painting caused an uproar when it was exhibited at the Sidney Janis Gallery in New York in 1953. Some critics believed that de Kooning had intentionally brutalized the female form and accused him of being against women, a claim that he adamantly denied. Others felt that he abandoned the fundamental ideals of abstraction. De Kooning's iterative process. De Kooning was not interested in creating finished paintings with smooth, precise brushwork. Instead, he took the abstract expressionist notion of process to the extreme. He worked and reworked his paintings, often scraping the paint from the entire surface of a canvas and beginning again. De Kooning spent 2 years working on Woman One. According to his wife, he scraped and repainted it dozens of times before arriving at the final image. So we're looking at his image here on the right. And then they're taking us in various places around the image as we click through. And that is the end of this unit, and I will pick up with unit 5.16. All right, thank you. See ya.